Officer Ryan Caldwell smirked as he cuffed Marcus Washington for stealing a Patek Philippe watch. 28 minutes later, his badge and gun landed on Police Commissioner Vanessa Washington's desk. "That's my son you arrested," she said coldly. "And that watch was my gift to him." Before we dive into this shocking story of racial injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about standing up against discrimination. What would you do if you were wrongfully arrested for simply owning something nice? The Greenfield Mall buzzed with weekend shoppers as 16-year-old Marcus Washington strolled through the wide corridors with his best friends, Deion Taylor and Jamal Brooks. The three high school juniors had saved up from their part-time jobs to buy the latest video game, laughing and debating which character they would choose first. Marcus unconsciously adjusted the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a precious gift from his mother for earning straight A's last semester. The timepiece gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its elegant design a stark contrast to his casual jeans and Westridge Academy hoodie. Inside next-gen electronics, Marcus examined the latest gaming headsets while Deion and Jamal argued about graphics cards at the next counter. Jason Whitley, a white store employee with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, had been watching the boys since they entered. His eyes repeatedly darted to Marcus's wrist, his lips tightening with each glance. Without approaching them or offering assistance, Jason picked up the store phone and made a quick call to mall security. Within minutes, security guard Tom Miller appeared at the store entrance, radio in hand. "Got a report of suspicious activity," Miller muttered into his radio. "Requesting officer backup." Officer Ryan Caldwell responded immediately. Well known throughout Westridge for his aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods, Caldwell had received multiple civilian complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, all mysteriously disappearing from his record. He strutted into the electronics store, hand resting on his holstered weapon, eyes scanning until they locked on Marcus. "You there, with the watch?" Caldwell barked, cutting through the store's ambient music. Customers turned to stare as Caldwell approached Marcus with deliberate, heavy steps. "Where'd you get that?" Marcus straightened his posture, remembering his mother's instructions about police interactions. "It's mine, sir. A gift from my mother for my grades." Caldwell's laugh echoed through the suddenly quiet store. "Right. Your mama bought you a $30,000 watch. You expect me to believe that?" His voice dripped with contempt. "People like you don't own watches like that unless they're stolen." Marcus reached for his wallet. "I have the receipt. My mother kept copies for insurance." "Don't move!" Caldwell shouted, drawing his weapon. "Hands where I can see them." Deion stepped forward. "He's just getting his wallet, man. The watch is really his." "Back up, or you're next," Caldwell threatened, pushing Deion against the display case. Phones appeared from all directions as customers began recording. Marcus stood perfectly still, arms slightly raised, fighting the tremor in his hands. "Officer, please check my wallet." "The receipt is there." Caldwell holstered his weapon and roughly grabbed Marcus's wallet, flipping through it before tossing it aside, ignoring the folded paper that fell out. "No receipt here. You're coming with me for questioning about stolen property." Jamal picked up the fallen paper. "It's right here. This is the receipt." Caldwell ignored him, spinning Marcus around and slamming him against the counter. The cold metal handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as Caldwell tightened them with unnecessary force. "Folks, nothing to see here. Just another shoplifter thinking he's clever," Caldwell announced to the watching crowd. Marcus felt the weight of every stare as he was marched through the mall, head down, shoulders hunched against the humiliation. Elderly white women clutched their purses tighter as he passed. Children pointed. A group of white teenagers snickered. With each step, Marcus retreated further into himself, his mother's warnings echoing in his mind: "No matter how successful we become, some will only see our skin." Caldwell shoved Marcus into the back of his patrol car and called for backup to take him to the station. Through the window, Marcus could see Dion and Jamal frantically making phone calls, their faces twisted with helpless anger. The mall's security guard stood by, avoiding eye contact, his posture suggesting he knew something wasn't right but lacked the courage to intervene. As the car pulled away, Marcus fixed his eyes on the watch that had triggered this nightmare, wondering how ownership of something beautiful could be considered a crime when you were black. The fluorescent lights of Westridge Police Station cast harsh shadows across Marcus's face as Officer Caldwell paraded him through the bullpen, announcing loudly about catching one of those mall thieves with an expensive watch. Officers looked up from their desks with varying expressions ranging from disinterest to discomfort to quiet approval. Desk Sergeant Thompson, a veteran officer with salt and pepper hair and deep crow's feet, frowned as Caldwell approached. "What's the charge here, Caldwell?" he asked, peering at Marcus over reading glasses. "Suspicious possession of high-value property and resisting questioning," Caldwell replied smugly. Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "Resisting? The kid looks terrified, not resistant." "And since when is owning something expensive a crime?" Caldwell's face hardened. "When it's clearly stolen." "Come on, Thompson, look at him. You think his kind can afford a Patek Philippe?" Marcus flinched at the naked prejudice but remained silent, remembering his mother's constant advice: stay calm, don't escalate, survive the encounter. Thompson's lips thinned with disapproval, but he processed the paperwork without further comment, a small cog in a machine too large to fight alone. "I want my phone call," Marcus said quietly as Caldwell prepared to lead him to a holding cell. "You'll get it when I decide," Caldwell snapped, but Thompson intervened. "He gets it now, Caldwell. That's procedure." Reluctantly, Caldwell allowed Marcus to make his call from the desk phone. With steady fingers betraying none of his inner turmoil, Marcus dialed his mother's cell number, careful not to reveal her identity. "Mom, I'm at Westridge Station. Officer Caldwell arrested me for stealing your gift." He paused, listening. "No, don't worry. I'm okay. Just come when you can." He hung up, his composed exterior masking the storm inside. As Caldwell led him toward the holding cells, Marcus's mind drifted to his childhood. Those long nights waiting for his mother to return from late shifts. How she'd slip into his room no matter the hour, kiss his forehead, and whisper promises of a better future. The sacrifices she made as a single parent, climbing the ranks in a department that viewed her as an unwelcome anomaly. Their home in the upper-middle-class neighborhood of Oak Hills, when neighbors occasionally called security on him for simply jogging down his own street. His straight-A report cards plastered on the refrigerator door. His Harvard application materials spread across his desk at home. His spotless record, carefully maintained because he understood the higher standards imposed on him. Officer Daniels, a younger cop with kind eyes, did a double-take as Marcus passed. Recognition flashed across his face, but he quickly averted his gaze, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. Marcus had met him at a community policing event last year, standing beside his mother, as she gave her speech about bridge building between law enforcement and minorities. Now Daniels pretended not to know him, another silent witness to injustice. The holding cell contained 4 other black men of varying ages. A teenager about Marcus's age with a split lip. A middle-aged man in a business suit with his tie confiscated. An elderly gentleman with arthritic hands. A 30-something man with dreadlocks and weary eyes. They nodded in silent acknowledgement as Marcus entered their shared cage. "What they get you for, young blood?" the older man asked gently. "Wearing my mother's gift," Marcus replied, lifting his still-cuffed wrists to show the watch. The businessman snorted. "I was driving suspiciously in my BMW. 3rd time this month." "Matching a description," said the man with dreadlocks. "Always matching some description." "Loitering," said the teenager, touching his swollen lip. "Outside my own apartment building." They shared their stories in hushed tones, each one a variation on the same theme, existing while black in a world that criminalized their presence. Marcus listened, really listened, absorbing the weight of shared experience that transcended age and social class. For all his mother's success and the privileges it afforded him, this cell demonstrated the fragile nature of his freedom. Officer Rivera, a Latina with sharp eyes and a perpetual frown, approached the cell with a paper cup of water. As she handed it to Marcus through the bars, she whispered, "Help is coming," before walking away briskly. The words settled over him like a protective cloak, allowing him to breathe more easily for the first time since Caldwell's hand had clamped around his arm at the mall. Outside the cell, he could hear Caldwell boasting to a group of officers, recounting his bust, with embellishments that painted Marcus as aggressive and uncooperative. Several officers laughed, slapping Caldwell on the back. Others remained silent, their faces unreadable masks. Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, knowing his mother would arrive soon. The watch on his wrist, the catalyst for his current situation, ticked steadily, counting down the minutes until justice would walk through the door. Police Commissioner Vanessa Washington sat at the head of the conference table in City Hall, surrounded by the mayor and his staff, discussing the new community policing initiative she had championed for months. The first black female police commissioner in the city's history. Vanessa had navigated the treacherous waters of law enforcement politics with strategic brilliance and unwavering determination. At 45, her hair was cropped short and professional, her charcoal suit impeccably tailored, her demeanor commanding respect without demanding it. Do you believe a mother should use her position of power to protect her child? Comment number 1 if you think Vanessa should recuse herself from this case entirely, or like this video if you believe she has a responsibility to use her authority to fight injustice, even when it involves her son. Subscribe to see more stories about powerful women who navigate complex ethical situations while fighting systemic racism. What would you do if you were in Vanessa's position, torn between your professional duties and protecting your child? Mayor Edwards was mid-sentence about budget allocations when Vanessa's phone vibrated. She normally never checked messages during meetings, but something made her glance down. Her son's name triggered an immediate physiological response: accelerated heartbeat, tightened chest, the rush of adrenaline that came with maternal instinct. The message was brief but sent ice through her veins. She read it twice, her expression never changing, years of police work having trained her to compartmentalize emotions with military precision. "Excuse me, Mayor Edwards," she interrupted with practiced calm. "I need to address an urgent situation at Westridge Station. Can we reconvene in 2 hours?" The mayor, a political ally who respected her work ethic, nodded without question. "Everything all right, Commissioner?" "Just a personnel matter that requires immediate attention," she replied, already gathering her notes, with efficient movements. As she strode toward the parking garage, Vanessa's mind flashed back to Marcus's 16th birthday 4 months ago. The wrapped box containing the Patek Philippe watch. His disbelief when he opened it. "Mom, this is too much," he had protested. She had taken his hands in hers, looking directly into eyes that mirrored her own. "This is your legacy, Marcus. Your grandfather wore a watch like this when he became the first black surgeon at Metropolitan Hospital. It represents excellence, perseverance, achievement. Wear it with pride, but also with caution. The world will question your right to own beautiful things. Never let them make you doubt you deserve them." 20 years of fighting within a system designed to exclude her had taught Vanessa patience and strategy. Starting as a beat cop in the city's roughest district, she had weathered racial slurs from suspects and colleagues alike, the sexual harassment from fellow officers, the supervisors who assigned her the most dangerous patrols without backup, the promotions that went to less qualified white males, the constant pressure to be twice as good for half the recognition. Despite it all, she had risen, building alliances with community leaders, politicians, and a few good officers who valued justice over brotherhood. Her appointment as commissioner 3 years ago had come after her predecessor's corruption scandal, the mayor needing a squeaky clean replacement who could repair public trust. She had seized the opportunity to implement reforms, knowing changes made from within lasted longer than those forced from without. Vanessa called her attorney from the car. "Gloria, it's Vanessa." Ryan Caldwell arrested Marcus at Greenfield Mall, claiming he stole the watch I gave him. "I'm heading to the station now." Gloria Patterson, who had represented Vanessa for 15 years, cursed under her breath. "That racist piece of work has had this coming. Want me to meet you there?" "Not yet. Let me handle the initial confrontation. Have papers ready for a formal complaint and investigation. This ends today." As she navigated traffic, Vanessa's thoughts turned to Marcus's father. Army Major David Washington had died in Afghanistan when Marcus was just 4 years old. On their last video call, David had made her promise to protect their son from the world's cruelty while preparing him to face it. "He'll have to be stronger than both of us combined," David had said. She had honored that promise every day since, teaching Marcus to excel academically while instilling street smarts, to stand tall while knowing when to be invisible, to be proud while remaining humble. The double consciousness required of black excellence. Every parental decision had been weighed against potential consequences in a society that viewed young black men as inherent threats. The neighborhood they lived in, carefully chosen for its good schools and low police presence. The talks about how to speak to authorities, how to dress to minimize suspicion, how to manage the rage that rightfully bubbled up against injustice. The careful cultivation of relationships with powerful people who could serve as protection if needed. Throughout her career, Vanessa had witnessed countless instances of police misconduct against black civilians. She had fought where she could, documented what she couldn't change, and strategically positioned herself to gain the authority needed to enact real reform. Now her son had become another statistic, another black body deemed suspicious for existing. The personal had collided with the professional in the most painful way possible. Vanessa pulled into the public parking lot rather than the commissioner's reserved space. She would enter Westridge Station not as the boss, but as a mother first, observing how her officers treated civilians before revealing her identity. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, straightened her jacket, and stepped out of the car, armored with righteous fury and 20 years of preparation for this moment. Vanessa Washington entered Westridge Police Station dressed in her civilian clothes rather than her uniform, a deliberate choice to experience the department as ordinary citizens did. The lobby bustled with activity, officers processing paperwork, civilians waiting on hard plastic chairs, the distinct power imbalance between the two groups palpable in the air. No one recognized her immediately, affording her the opportunity to observe. A young black woman at the front desk was being repeatedly asked to clarify her statement about a stolen car, the officer's tones suggesting disbelief. An elderly Hispanic man waited patiently, having been there for 3 hours according to his frustrated mumbling. 2 white college students reporting a dormitory theft were being treated with coffee and efficient service. Vanessa absorbed it all, mental notes accumulating like storm clouds. She approached the desk casually, noting how the officer's eyes assessed her expensive but conservative attire, making rapid calculations about how much respect to offer. "I'm here about a young man brought in regarding a watch," she said neutrally. The desk officer, Jenkins according to his nameplate, barely looked up. "Waiting area is over there. Someone will take your statement eventually." "I believe Officer Caldwell is handling the case," Vanessa pressed. Jenkins's expression changed slightly at Caldwell's name. "Oh, the mall thief?" "Yeah, Caldwell's processing him now." "You a relative?" Before Vanessa could answer, the station door opened, and Chief Deputy Wallace entered. Stopping short at the sight of Vanessa standing at the desk like a regular civilian. "Commissioner Washington," he stammered, causing Jenkins's head to snap up, face draining of color. "What brings you here unannounced?" The atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly. Officers straightened postures, civilians looked confused, and somewhere in the bullpen, a chair scraped loudly as someone stood quickly. Vanessa maintained her composure, though her voice cooled several degrees. I'm here to see the young man Officer Caldwell arrested at the mall today. The one accused of stealing a Patek Philippe watch. Wallace's expression flickered between confusion and dawning comprehension. Of course, right away. Jenkins, where is Officer Caldwell? Jenkins fumbled with his computer. Processing room 2, sir. Vanessa moved toward the security door without waiting for an escort, Wallace hurrying to catch up and badge them through. As they entered the bullpen, conversations died mid-sentence. Officer Daniels visibly winced, averting his eyes. Officer Rivera stood straighter, a flash of relief crossing her features. At the far end of the room, Officer Ryan Caldwell sat at a desk, laughing as he filled out paperwork, apparently recounting his arrest to 2 other officers. And then this punk tries to tell me his mama bought him a $30,000 watch. Like his kind could afford that without dealing drugs or something. The officers with him chuckled, unaware of the approaching storm. Vanessa stopped directly behind Caldwell, her presence finally registered by the other officers, whose laughter cut off abruptly. Caldwell, misinterpreting their reaction, grinned wider. What, too un-PC for you snowflakes? You know I'm right. Officer Caldwell, Vanessa said, her voice carrying the weight of glaciers. Caldwell froze, then slowly turned. Recognition dawned, followed by confusion, then alarm. Commissioner Washington. I didn't know you were visiting today. The entire station had gone silent. Every eye on them, the surveillance cameras in the corners capturing everything. Vanessa's expression remained perfectly neutral, only the slight flare of her nostrils betraying her fury. I'd like to see the thief you arrested. The one with the Patek Philippe watch. Pride briefly overrode Caldwell's caution. Yes, ma'am. Good police work if I do say so myself. Caught him red-handed at the mall, acting suspicious with this watch that was obviously stolen. These kids think they can just take whatever they want these days. Wallace shifted uncomfortably beside her as Caldwell continued his self-congratulatory monologue. We've had reports of high-end watches being stolen across the county. When I saw this kid wearing one, I knew something wasn't right. Just didn't fit the profile, if you know what I mean. Vanessa let him talk, each word another nail in his professional coffin. And where is this thief now? Holding cell 3. I was just finishing the paperwork before questioning him properly. His emphasis on properly sent a chill through the room. Bring him out, Vanessa ordered. Wallace nodded to a nearby officer, who hurried toward the cells. Caldwell stood, still oblivious to the danger he was in. You'll see what I mean when you see him, Commissioner. Clearly not the type to own something like that legitimately. I've got good instincts about these things. The side door opened, and Marcus was led in, still handcuffed, his expression shifting from resignation to relief at the sight of his mother. The room collectively inhaled as understanding spread like wildfire. Caldwell looked between them, confusion evident. You know this perk, Commissioner? Vanessa took 3 measured steps forward, stopping directly in front of Caldwell. Close enough that he had to resist the urge to back away. That perp is Marcus Washington. My son. And that watch you accused him of stealing was my gift to him for his academic achievements. The color drained from Caldwell's face. Your son? But I didn't. There was no way to know. No way except to listen when he told you. No way except to check the receipt he offered to show you. No way except to treat a young black man with the same presumption of innocence you'd give a white teenager. Her voice never raised, yet carried to every corner of the silent room. Uncuff my son. Now. The officer holding Marcus quickly removed the handcuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the red marks from 2 tight restraints visible to everyone. Vanessa gently took his hands, examining the abrasions, her touch triggering a slight tremor in his carefully maintained composure. She turned back to Caldwell, who had begun sweating visibly. Your badge and gun. On the desk. Caldwell blinked rapidly. Commissioner, this is just a misunderstanding. If I'd known he was your son, That's precisely the problem, Officer Caldwell. His treatment shouldn't depend on who his mother is. Every person who walks through those doors deserves fair treatment regardless of their connections or their skin color. She extended her hand. Badge and gun. Now. Chief Deputy Wallace stepped forward. Commissioner, perhaps we should follow proper channels. Administrative leave pending an investigation. I've been following proper channels for 20 years, Wallace. Vanessa cut him off, her gaze never leaving Caldwell. And in those 20 years, Officer Caldwell has received 43 civilian complaints for racial profiling and excessive force. 43 complaints that mysteriously vanished from his record or were buried in bureaucratic red tape. Whispers rippled through the bullpen. Vanessa continued. 6 of those complaints crossed my desk in the last month alone. I've been building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for a formal review. Today, he accelerated that timeline by targeting my son. Caldwell's face transitioned from pale to mottled red. You've been investigating me? That's a witch hunt. The union will receive copies of every complaint, every bodycam footage I've collected, and the surveillance video of you laughing about arresting his kind 5 minutes ago. Vanessa interrupted. Your badge and gun, Officer Caldwell. This isn't a request. With shaking hands, Caldwell unclipped his badge and removed his service weapon, placing both on the desk between them. The symbolic weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, witnessed by dozens of officers whose own behavior would now be scrutinized under their commissioner's unforgiving lens. Vanessa picked up the items, tucking them into her jacket pocket. As of this moment, you are suspended pending formal termination proceedings. Officer Rivera, please escort Mr. Caldwell to clear out his locker. He is not to remove any documents or electronic devices. Rivera stepped forward immediately, professional satisfaction evident in her crisp movements. Vanessa turned to address the silent room. Let me be absolutely clear. What happened today was not an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was the predictable result of systemic failures I have been working to address since becoming commissioner. Starting tomorrow, every officer in this department will undergo additional bias training. Body cameras will be reviewed daily, not monthly. Civilian complaints will come directly to my office. The blue wall of silence ends now. She placed her arm around Marcus's shoulders, her touch gentle but her stance unmistakably protective. We will be filing formal charges for wrongful detention and civil rights violations. I suggest those of you who witnessed Officer Caldwell's behavior today prepare your statements. As she led Marcus toward the exit, the stunned silence gave way to urgent whispers and the sounds of nervous movement. Vanessa Washington had declared war on the status quo, using her son's humiliation as the launching point for a reckoning long overdue. And everyone present knew that when Vanessa Washington went to war, she did not lose. The video hit social media before Vanessa and Marcus had even left the police station. Filmed by a teenage girl at the mall, it showed the entire confrontation in high definition. Caldwell's aggressive approach, Marcus's calm attempts to explain, the unnecessary force during the handcuffing, the disparaging remarks about his kind, and the triumphant march through crowds of staring shoppers. Within an hour, it had 10,000 shares. By dinner time, the counter had reached 100,000 and climbing. National news organizations picked up the story, their headlines varying based on political leanings. Commissioner's son racially profiled by own department, versus police commissioner intervenes in son's arrest, sparking controversy. Local reporter Sophia Chen from Channel 12 News stationed herself outside police headquarters. Her live broadcast cutting through the noise with sharp, factual reporting. Sources within the department confirmed that 16-year-old Marcus Washington was arrested solely for wearing an expensive watch, despite having proof of ownership. Commissioner Washington, who has spent her 3-year tenure implementing reforms to combat exactly this type of profiling, suspended Officer Ryan Caldwell on the spot. This marks the first time in the department's history that an officer has faced immediate consequences for racial profiling. By nightfall, protesters gathered outside the station, their signs illuminated by news cameras. Justice for Marcus. Black ownership is not a crime. If it happens to the commissioner's son, what happens to ours? Mayor Edwards called an emergency press conference, his usual confidence noticeably diminished as he faced the media barrage. The incident today involving Commissioner Washington's son is deeply troubling and under full investigation. This administration has zero tolerance for racial profiling, and appropriate action is being taken. When pressed about Caldwell's history of complaints, Edwards deflected. I cannot comment on personnel matters during an active investigation. Behind the scenes, political pressure mounted. The police union president, Dean Wyatt, called the mayor repeatedly, demanding Caldwell's reinstatement and accusing Vanessa of abusing her power for personal vengeance. City council members chose sides, weighing public opinion against police relationships. At the Washington home, Marcus sat in his bedroom, the television muted as his face appeared on screen again and again. The mall video played on loop, his humiliation broadcast to millions. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, classmates, even strangers who had found his social media accounts. Panic clawed at his chest, constricting his breathing, the walls of his room seeming to close in despite the spacious dimensions. Vanessa found him hyperventilating, curled on his bed, the watch that had caused everything clutched in his fist. She sat beside him, rubbing slow circles on his back until his breathing regulated. I wanted to stop, he whispered. The videos, the messages. Everyone looking at me like I'm either a victim or a troublemaker. Nothing in between. Vanessa nodded, understanding completely. It will pass, but not quickly. This isn't just about you anymore. You've become a symbol of something bigger. I never asked to be a symbol. I just wanted to buy a video game with my friends. The raw pain in his voice broke something in Vanessa's carefully maintained composure. She gathered him into her arms, her son still small enough to hold despite his growing height. I know, baby. I know. While Marcus struggled with unwanted attention, Vanessa faced professional backlash. Anonymous officers within the department began a whisper campaign, suggesting she had overreacted and undermined department morale. Parking tickets appeared on her personal vehicle. Case files went mysteriously missing. Reports were filed late. Small, deniable acts of rebellion that sent a clear message. The blue line had been crossed. Officer Rivera reported these incidents directly to Vanessa, having positioned herself as an ally in the internal struggle. They're trying to force you to back down on Caldwell, she explained during a private meeting. The old guard sees this as a betrayal, Commissioner. They're saying if you'd followed procedure, this would have been handled quietly. Vanessa's expression remained impassive. And if it had been anyone other than my son, it would have been buried like the 43 previous complaints. That ends now. At Westridge Academy, Marcus's return created a social earthquake. Some students avoided him, uncomfortable with his new notoriety. Others approached with awkward sympathy or invasive questions. A small group of white parents contacted the administration, suggesting Marcus's presence was disruptive following the incident. But these reactions were overwhelmed by an outpouring of support from classmates who had experienced similar, if less publicized, encounters with law enforcement. Dion and Jamal became impromptu spokespeople, recounting the mall incident to anyone who would listen, their righteous anger giving Marcus space to process his own complicated emotions. Dion's impassioned defense during lunch period went viral when another student recorded it. You think this is about a watch? This is about who gets to exist without explanation. This is about who belongs and who doesn't. Marcus belongs. And that badge didn't give Caldwell the right to decide otherwise. Conservative media outlets attempted to undermine the narrative by digging into Vanessa and Marcus's background. They questioned the expense of the watch, insinuating corruption. They highlighted Marcus's attendance at an elite private school, suggesting privilege and validated claims of discrimination. They brought up a minor school infraction from Marcus's freshman year, when he'd been given detention for disrespectful language, after challenging a teacher's racially insensitive remarks. Each attack was methodically countered by Vanessa's supporters and by Marcus's growing online defenders, who created a hashtag campaign, #TruthForMarcus. The Washington home received 3 anonymous threatening letters, each more explicit than the last, promising retribution for attacking a good officer who was just doing his job. Vanessa increased security without telling Marcus, not wanting to add to his anxiety. She contacted trusted officers to drive by the house regularly and installed additional cameras. Gloria Patterson, her attorney, filed restraining orders against Caldwell and known associates. The community response transcended the immediate controversy. Black parents organized discussion groups about talking to their children about police encounters. Local businesses displayed supportive messages. Religious leaders of various faiths incorporated the incident into their sermons, calling for reflection and justice. What had begun as one officer's biased assumption had erupted into a citywide reckoning about who was presumed innocent and who was presumed guilty by default. 1 month after the arrest, Channel 12 aired a special report featuring interviews with other victims of Caldwell's profiling. Men and women, predominantly Black and Latino, described similar experiences. Being stopped for driving nice cars, shopping in upscale stores, or simply existing in predominantly white neighborhoods. Their stories had gone unheard until Marcus's case shattered the silence. The final segment showed Marcus, accompanied by Vanessa, addressing a community meeting at First Baptist Church. His voice steady despite his obvious discomfort with public speaking. What happened to me happens every day to people who don't have a police commissioner for a mother. Their stories don't make the news. Their officers don't get suspended. Their trauma doesn't spark protests. But their experiences are just as real and just as wrong. If my situation helps change that, then maybe it was worth it. Detective Elena Ramirez hunched over her desk in the Internal Affairs Division, surrounded by towering stacks of files. As the lead investigator assigned to the Caldwell case, she had spent weeks combing through years of incident reports, civilian complaints, and performance reviews. The pattern that emerged was as disturbing as it was undeniable. Did you know that studies show Black Americans are up to 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police than white Americans? Comment number 1 if you believe this type of systemic racism requires immediate police reform. Or hit that like button if you think better training and accountability are the answers. Make sure to subscribe for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate those fighting to make a difference. How do you think departments should address officers with patterns of discriminatory behavior? This goes way beyond Marcus Washington, Ramirez muttered to her partner, Detective Jackson. Caldwell has been targeting Black and Latino civilians for his entire career. She pulled up a spreadsheet tracking Caldwell's arrests by race. 87% were minorities. Despite the city's population being only 35% non-white. Even more damning were the disposition records. Over half of those arrests resulted in charges being dropped for lack of evidence or improper procedure. He wasn't making good arrests, Jackson observed, reviewing the data. He was harassing people of color, knowing most wouldn't have the resources to fight back legally. Ramirez nodded grimly. And when they did complain, look at this. She pointed to another spreadsheet showing the 43 complaints Vanessa had mentioned, all systematically buried through bureaucratic maneuvering. Some had been marked unfounded, without investigation. Others disappeared into administrative black holes, never reaching formal review. The most serious had been settled quietly with taxpayer money and non-disclosure agreements. Someone was protecting him, Jackson concluded. The question is who, and how high up it goes. Their investigation expanded beyond Caldwell himself. While analyzing his departmental communications, Ramirez discovered disturbing emails between Caldwell and several officers in which they shared racist memes and derogatory language about minorities. More alarming were his connections to online forums frequented by white supremacist groups, where he posted under a thinly veiled pseudonym, boasting about cleaning up the streets and putting them in their place. Meanwhile, Marcus gave his formal statement, recounting the mall incident in painstaking detail. Despite his composed exterior, the psychological impact was evident in his occasional pauses and the tight grip he maintained on his mother's hand. He kept saying people like you and your kind. Marcus explained, his voice steady but strained. He never explicitly mentioned race, but his meaning was clear from his tone and expression. The legal significance wasn't lost on anyone present. Caldwell had been careful to avoid recorded racial slurs while conveying his prejudice through coded language and actions, a common tactic used to evade hate crime enhancements and discrimination lawsuits. Security footage from the mall provided crucial corroboration. Multiple camera angles captured Caldwell's aggressive approach, the way he ignored the receipt, his unnecessary force, and the humiliating walk through the mall. Even more telling was footage from other days showing Caldwell systematically targeting young Black and Latino shoppers while ignoring white teenagers exhibiting identical behaviors. As the investigation gained momentum, other victims of Caldwell's profiling came forward. A Black cardiac surgeon detained while driving his Mercedes. A Latino college professor handcuffed outside his own home while getting mail. A 16-year-old Black girl accused of shoplifting while carrying items with receipts. Each story followed the same pattern: presumption of guilt, dismissal of evidence proving innocence, excessive force, and humiliation. The district attorney's office began reviewing all of Caldwell's arrests from the past 5 years, identifying numerous cases built on questionable evidence and potentially coerced confessions. The investigation uncovered something even more disturbing: evidence of departmental cover-ups. Deputy Chief James Sullivan's name appeared repeatedly in connection with buried complaints against Caldwell and other officers with similar patterns. Email exchanges showed Sullivan explicitly directing subordinates to handle complaints against certain officers discreetly, ensuring they never reached formal review or public disclosure. Officer Rivera provided critical testimony about the department's culture of protection. It was understood that certain officers were untouchable, she explained during her interview. Caldwell was Sullivan's protege. Complaints against him were treated as attacks on the department itself. She described a two-tiered system where officers aligned with Sullivan's old guard mentality received promotions and choice assignments, while those who reported misconduct faced retaliation and career stagnation. Commissioner Washington's appointment changed things for those of us who wanted reform. But Sullivan's faction has been actively undermining her efforts from day one. The department fractured along increasingly visible lines. Officers who supported Vanessa's reforms versus those loyal to Sullivan and the traditional brotherhood mentality. Some officers requested transfers to different precincts to escape the toxic environment. Others took stress leave. A few resigned rather than choose sides in what had become an ideological civil war within the force. Marcus, processing the broader implications of his experience, began researching civil rights law and historical patterns of police discrimination. His bedroom walls, once covered with college pennants and basketball posters, now displayed timeline charts of landmark legal cases and statistics on racial disparities in the criminal justice system. "I'm thinking about law school after Harvard," he told his mother one evening. Constitutional law or civil rights litigation. Vanessa recognized the fire of purpose ignited by trauma, having experienced it herself after facing discrimination as a rookie officer. She recognized both the healing and the danger in turning personal pain into professional mission. "Just make sure you're running towards something, not away from something," she advised. "The law needs people like you, but you need to be whole first." The investigation's most significant breakthrough came when Ramirez discovered a confidential file in Sullivan's office records. The folder, marked Special Handling, contained documentation of a previous incident where Caldwell had been disciplined for excessive force against a Black teenager 3 years earlier. The discipline had never been entered into his official record, and the teenager's family had been pressured into dropping their complaint with threats of drug charges against their son. Tom Miller, the mall's security guard who had called Caldwell about Marcus, provided another crucial piece of evidence. During his interview, Miller admitted that Caldwell had instructed security personnel at various shopping centers to contact him directly when suspicious individuals entered high-end stores. When pressed on what made someone suspicious, Miller reluctantly acknowledged that race was the primary factor. He told us to watch for young black males especially. Said they were the most likely to be trouble. Miller's testimony confirmed what the pattern of incidents had suggested. Caldwell's actions weren't isolated mistakes but part of a deliberate, racially motivated campaign of harassment and intimidation. After 6 weeks of investigation, Ramirez submitted her preliminary report to Commissioner Washington, the mayor, and the Police Review Board. The document detailed not only Caldwell's individual misconduct but the systemic failures that had enabled it to continue unchecked for years. Its conclusion was unequivocal. Officer Ryan Caldwell has demonstrated a clear pattern of racial bias in his policing practices, violated multiple departmental policies and civil rights statutes, and shown no remorse or recognition of wrongdoing. Furthermore, evidence suggests his behavior was known to and protected by superior officers, indicating a culture of complicity that extends beyond this single case. The stage was set for a public hearing that would put not just Caldwell but the entire department on trial in the court of public opinion. And behind the scenes, those implicated in the cover-ups began desperately destroying evidence, knowing their careers and reputations hung in the balance of what Marcus's watch had inadvertently exposed. The Police Review Board hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m, but crowds began gathering outside City Hall by 7. Community activists distributed coffee and hand warmers to counter the autumn chill. News vans lined the perimeter, reporters doing live morning broadcasts against the backdrop of growing crowds. Inside, the grand chamber with its ornate ceiling and polished wood panels had been arranged like a courtroom. The 7 board members sat at an elevated table, 3 civilian appointees, 2 retired judges, a civil rights attorney, and a former police chief from a neighboring county. Their selection had been deliberately balanced to ensure impartiality, or at least the appearance of it. Vanessa, honoring her commitment to procedural integrity, had recused herself from the proceedings but sat in the front row, dressed in civilian clothes rather than her uniform. Marcus sat beside her, wearing a charcoal suit that made him look older than his 16 years, the controversial watch deliberately visible on his wrist. Behind them sat rows of community members, activists, fellow officers, and city officials, the tension in the room palpable as opposing factions avoided eye contact. At precisely 9, Officer Ryan Caldwell entered with his attorney, Michael Grant, the police union's most aggressive legal representative. Caldwell had lost weight since his suspension, his uniform replaced by an ill-fitting suit, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Yet his posture remained defiant, chin raised, eyes challenging as they swept across the room. Chair Justice Martha Rodriguez, a retired state Supreme Court justice known for her no-nonsense approach, called the hearing to order. This proceeding will determine whether Officer Ryan Caldwell's conduct in the arrest of Marcus Washington constitutes grounds for termination under departmental policy and city ordinances. It will also examine broader concerns about potential patterns of discriminatory policing. This is not a criminal trial, but an administrative review of professional conduct. Grant immediately objected to the scope. My client is being subjected to a witch hunt based on a single incident that has been politicized due to the civilian's relationship to Commissioner Washington. We request the review be limited strictly to the mall incident without prejudicial inclusion of unrelated allegations. Rodriguez fixed him with a steely gaze. Objection noted and overruled. The board will consider all relevant evidence in assessing Officer Caldwell's fitness to serve. Mr. Grant, your client is not on trial for his beliefs, but for his actions in uniform. Those actions, whether isolated or part of a pattern, fall squarely within our purview. The first witness called was Marcus himself. As he took the oath, his hand trembled slightly, but his voice remained clear and measured. For 45 minutes, he recounted the mall incident, describing Caldwell's approach, tone, language, and physical handling. Under Grant's aggressive cross-examination, Marcus never wavered, his responses thoughtful and precise, occasionally referring to notes he had prepared. "And isn't it true," Grant pressed, "that you were acting suspiciously in the store? Moving around nervously, watching the employees?" "No, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "I was shopping for a video game with my friends. The same as any other customer. But you must admit, a teenager with a $30,000 watch does raise legitimate questions. Officer Caldwell was simply doing his duty by investigating." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Sir, white teenagers wear expensive items in that mall every day without being questioned. The only suspicious thing about me was my skin color." A murmur rippled through the audience. Grant shifted tactics. "You're clearly an intelligent young man who's been coached well for this hearing. But in the heat of the moment at the mall, weren't you disrespectful to Officer Caldwell? Didn't you resist his lawful commands?" For the first time, emotion cracked through Marcus's composed exterior. "With all due respect, sir, I did everything I was taught to do when confronted by police. I kept my hands visible. I spoke politely. I offered documentation. I didn't argue or resist. I was still handcuffed, humiliated, and locked in a cell. So please don't suggest I brought this on myself by being disrespectful." The room fell silent, the raw truth of his words hanging in the air. Even Grant paused before murmuring, "No further questions." Jason, the electronics store employee who had initially reported Marcus, testified next. Visibly uncomfortable under the chamber's bright lights. "I see lots of shoplifters, okay? You develop an instinct. And what triggered your instinct about Marcus Washington?" asked the board's counsel. Jason squirmed. "He just didn't seem like the type to have that kind of watch." "The type? Could you elaborate?" "You know what I mean," Jason muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Can you state for the record what you mean?" Jason's face flushed. "Fine. A black kid in a hoodie with a watch worth more than I make in a year. It didn't add up." "Did you approach him to ask about the watch?" "No." "Did you see him conceal merchandise or act in a manner consistent with shoplifting?" "No." "But, so you called security based solely on the disconnect between his race, his attire, and his possession of a luxury item?" Jason's silence was answer enough. Officer Daniels's testimony proved unexpectedly pivotal. Initially reluctant, his conscience had eventually compelled him to come forward. Officer Caldwell made comments daily about minorities. He testified, his posture rigid with tension. He called certain neighborhoods animal kingdoms and referred to black suspects as thugs regardless of the alleged offense. He often bragged about teaching lessons to uppity minorities who he felt didn't show proper respect. Grant objected strenuously. "This is character assassination unrelated to the incident at hand." Rodriguez overruled him again. "Officer Daniels, did you ever report these comments?" "No, ma'am," Daniels admitted, shame evident in his expression. "I was afraid of retaliation." Officers who reported misconduct often found themselves without backup in dangerous situations or passed over for promotions. The most damning evidence came from Caldwell's own body camera. While he had manually turned it off during parts of the mall encounter, he had forgotten to deactivate it while transporting Marcus to the station. The unedited audio captured Caldwell speaking to another officer via radio. "Got one of those entitled N-words who thinks he can wear whatever he wants. Probably stole it, but even if he didn't, I'm gonna make sure he learns his place." The slur, unambiguous in the recording, sent shockwaves through the chamber. Grant desperately tried to have the evidence excluded, claiming chain of custody issues, but the board unanimously overruled him. The hearing continued for 3 days, with testimony from Detective Ramirez about her investigation findings, from community members about previous encounters with Caldwell, from character witnesses on both sides. Throughout, Caldwell sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to Grant but otherwise showing no reaction to the mounting evidence against him. On the final day, Caldwell finally took the stand in his own defense. Under Grant's careful questioning, he portrayed himself as a dedicated officer with a tough beat, making split-second decisions in a dangerous job. "I saw a situation that didn't look right," he insisted. "Any good officer would have investigated. This isn't about race. It's about criminal patterns I've observed over 15 years on the force." During cross-examination, however, Caldwell's facade cracked. When presented with statistical evidence of his disproportionate targeting of minorities, he grew combative. When confronted with his recorded slur, he claimed it was taken out of context. When asked directly if he would have questioned a white teenager wearing the same watch, he evaded the question repeatedly until Rodriguez demanded a yes or no answer. "Probably not," he finally admitted, adding defiantly, "because it wouldn't have been suspicious." A collective intake of breath swept the room at his unwitting confession of the very bias he had been denying. As the hearing neared its conclusion, the board deliberated while the chamber buzzed with tension. Community members held a prayer circle outside. News helicopters circled the building. Social media exploded with conflicting hashtags. Hashtag Stand with Caldwell from police supporters versus hashtag Justice for Marcus from civil rights advocates. When the board returned, Rodriguez delivered their unanimous decision. Based on the preponderance of evidence presented, this board finds that Officer Ryan Caldwell engaged in racial profiling, excessive force, false arrest, and conduct unbecoming an officer. We further find that these actions were not isolated but part of a pattern of discriminatory policing that violated departmental policies, city ordinances, and the civil rights of numerous citizens. She paused, looking directly at Caldwell. "It is therefore the decision of this board that Officer Ryan Caldwell be immediately and permanently terminated from the Westridge Police Department, that all pension benefits be forfeited, and that this case be referred to the district attorney for consideration of criminal civil rights charges." She then addressed the broader implications. Furthermore, this board recommends a comprehensive independent investigation into departmental practices, with particular focus on complaint procedures, supervision failures, and potential cover-ups of officer misconduct. The culture that enabled Officer Caldwell's behavior must be addressed systematically if public trust is to be restored. The room erupted in mixed reactions: cheers from community members, angry muttering from Caldwell's supporters, a flurry of movement as reporters rushed to file their stories. Through it all, Marcus sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, feeling neither the vindication nor the closure he had expected. Beside him, Vanessa squeezed his hand gently, both of them knowing this was only the beginning of a much longer fight. The board's decision reverberated through the city like a thunderclap. Its impacts felt differently across divided communities. Outside City Hall, demonstrators from opposing sides faced off across police barricades, their chants creating a cacophony of anger and relief. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting aerial views of the growing crowds to anxious viewers at home. Inside the chamber, Caldwell's reaction was immediate and volcanic. He lunged to his feet, face contorted with rage, pointing at Vanessa and Marcus. "This is a setup. A conspiracy to push your diversity agenda." His attorney attempted to restrain him, but Caldwell shook him off, his voice rising to a shout. "You think this ends with me? The whole department knows what you're doing, Washington. You and your spoiled brat won't be safe anywhere in this city." Security officers moved swiftly, positioning themselves between Caldwell and the Washingtons. Chair Rodriguez banged her gavel repeatedly. "Officer Caldwell, control yourself or be removed." "It's Mr. Caldwell now, isn't it?" he snarled, straightening his jacket with jerky movements. "Congratulations on destroying a good cop's career over political correctness. I hope you all sleep well tonight knowing criminals are celebrating. As security escorted him from the chamber, Caldwell locked eyes with Marcus one final time, his expression promising this wasn't over. The threat hung in the air long after he'd been removed from the building. Mayor Edwards approached Vanessa immediately after adjournment, his smile camera-ready but his eyes calculating. A just outcome, Commissioner. Your leadership through this difficult situation has been commendable. Once the reporters moved out of earshot, his tone changed. My office, 15 minutes. We need to discuss damage control. In the mayor's wood-paneled office, Edwards paced behind his desk while Vanessa sat composed, Marcus waiting outside with a security detail. The police union is threatening a vote of no confidence, Edwards said without preamble. Sullivan is rallying officers for a blue flu sick-out. 3 city council members have called me demanding your resignation. Vanessa remained impassive. And your position, Mayor? Edwards sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Publicly, I support you 100%. You know that. But Vanessa, be realistic. You've declared war on your own department. There will be consequences, politically and personally. There have always been consequences for challenging the status quo, she replied evenly. I was appointed to reform this department, not to preserve comfortable corruption. Reform requires cooperation. How will you implement changes if half your officers are actively working against you? By removing those officers if necessary. The investigation into Sullivan begins tomorrow. Edwards stopped pacing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're moving too fast, targeting too many powerful figures at once. Would you be giving me the same advice if it hadn't been my son in handcuffs? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Edwards finally sighed. Just tread carefully. There are elements in this city who would use this situation to undermine everything you've built. 2 days later, Marcus returned to Westridge Academy. The school's stone entrance crowded with news vans and curious onlookers. Principal Santiago met him at the administrative entrance, offering a buffer from the media circus. We're with you, Marcus, she assured him, her hand steady on his shoulder. Security has been increased, and teachers have been instructed not to allow the incident to be discussed in class unless academically relevant. The precautions proved both necessary and insufficient. While most students expressed support, social dynamics had shifted in unpredictable ways. Some of Marcus's white friends avoided him, their parents having forbidden contact with someone caught up in controversy. Others treated him with awkward deference, as if his trauma had transformed him into someone fragile and unknowable. In the cafeteria, conversations stopped when he entered. In the hallways, younger students pointed and whispered. One morning, Marcus found his locker vandalized with a crude drawing of handcuffs and the words, "Playing the race card," scrawled across his nameplate. That same day, he learned 3 white families had withdrawn their children from Westridge, citing concerns about the school environment. The administration quickly removed the graffiti and identified the perpetrators, but the damage to Marcus's sense of belonging had been done. I used to feel like I belonged here, he told his therapist, Dr. Powell, during their twice-weekly session. Now I feel like an exhibit in a museum of racial injustice. Everyone's staring, but nobody really sees me anymore. At the police department, Vanessa implemented immediate reforms despite growing resistance. Body cameras became mandatory for all citizen interactions, with random daily reviews by civilian oversight personnel. Complaint procedures were streamlined, with an anonymous online reporting system bypassing the chain of command. Mandatory bias training was scheduled for all officers, conducted by external experts rather than internal trainers. Each change provoked backlash from Sullivan's faction. Reports were filed late or with crucial details missing. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. Scheduled trainings saw officers calling in sick or sitting in stony silence, refusing to participate meaningfully. The Blue Wall had transformed into active sabotage, with Sullivan at its center, careful to maintain plausible deniability while orchestrating resistance. The threats became personal one evening when Vanessa and Marcus returned from dinner to find a note tucked under their windshield wiper. Badges stick together. Eyes are watching. You're not safe. Vanessa immediately had the note processed for fingerprints and handwriting analysis, while increasing security at their home. She debated sending Marcus to stay with his grandparents in another state but decided against it, knowing retreat would be interpreted as weakness by those trying to intimidate them. Instead, she installed additional security cameras, changed their routines, and arranged for trusted officers to provide discreet protection. The psychological toll on Marcus manifested in nightmares that left him gasping awake, sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom sensation of handcuffs around his wrists. In therapy, Dr. Powell diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, unsurprising given the public nature of his humiliation and the ongoing threats. I keep dreaming about being locked in a cell and forgotten, Marcus confessed during one session. Everyone knows I'm innocent, but they leave me there anyway because it's easier than admitting they were wrong. These nocturnal terrors contrasted sharply with his daytime determination. Marcus threw himself into research, reading legal cases about racial profiling, studying the history of police reform movements, connecting online with other young people who had experienced similar trauma. His bedroom became command central for what he began calling his education in reality, the gap between textbook citizenship and lived experience as a young black man in America. While Marcus processed his experience through knowledge, Deputy Chief Sullivan and his allies scrambled to protect themselves from the expanding investigation. Late-night meetings in secure locations, shredded documents, deleted emails, coordinated statements designed to create plausible deniability. The Sullivan Network, as Internal Affairs had labeled it, had spent years insulating itself from oversight, but Ramirez's investigation was methodically dismantling those protections. At Rising Hope Baptist Church, Reverend Johnson organized a community meeting that quickly evolved into a forum for sharing experiences of racial profiling. Hundreds attended, including Marcus and Vanessa. Sitting quietly in the back as speaker after speaker approached the microphone. A grandmother described being pulled over monthly in her late-model sedan. A college student recounted being frisked while walking to the library. A surgeon detailed being handcuffed outside his own home while getting the mail. The commonalities in their stories, the assumptions of guilt, the dismissal of explanations, the ritual humiliation, created a tapestry of systemic bias that transcended individual officers or incidents. After listening for 2 hours, Marcus asked to speak. A hush fell over the congregation as he approached the podium, Vanessa watching with a mixture of pride and concern. "A month ago, I thought what happened to me was unusual," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Now I understand it was only unusual because my mother could do something about it. Most of you didn't have that advantage. But your stories deserve the same attention and action." He outlined his emerging idea for a youth advocacy program that would document incidents, provide Know Your Rights training, and connect victims with legal resources. "I'm calling it Timepiece," he explained, touching his watch. "Because what was stolen from us wasn't property, it was time. Time spent in humiliating detentions. Time spent explaining our innocence. Time spent processing trauma. Time stolen from our education, our families, our advancement. This organization will help us reclaim that time and turn it into change." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of young people surrounded Marcus, offering to volunteer, sharing contact information, coalescing around his vision with the organic energy of a movement finding its moment. Watching from a distance, Vanessa recognized the transformation happening before her eyes. Her son was converting victimization into purpose, trauma into action. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan Caldwell sat in a dimly lit basement surrounded by a dozen men with expressions hardened by resentment. The guardians of justice, they called themselves, former officers and police sympathizers united by opposition to what they termed the anti-cop agenda. Caldwell had joined after his termination, finding validation for his grievances and camaraderie in shared anger. "Washington thinks she's won," he told the group, alcohol slurring his words slightly. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." The others nodded, unaware that among them sat an undercover detective, recording every word of their increasingly violent fantasies of retribution. 3 months after the hearing, spring sunlight streamed through tall windows at the Police Academy auditorium, where 58 new officers prepared to take their oath of service. The graduating class, the most diverse in department history, sat in pressed uniforms, their expressions a mixture of pride and solemnity. At the podium, Marcus Washington adjusted his tie, the Patek Philippe gleaming on his wrist as he arranged his notes. At 16, he was an unusual keynote speaker for such an occasion. But his story had become inextricably linked to the department's ongoing transformation. "When I was handcuffed for wearing this watch," he began, his voice steady, "I experienced what thousands of black and brown citizens have endured for generations, the presumption of guilt based solely on appearance. My case made headlines only because my mother held a position of power. Most victims of profiling never received justice or acknowledgement." The cadets listened intently as Marcus continued, "You're entering law enforcement at a pivotal moment. The choice before you isn't just about enforcing laws, but about whether those laws will be applied equally to all citizens regardless of race, wealth, or status. The badge you'll receive today carries both authority and responsibility. How you balance those will define not just your careers, but the communities you serve." From her seat on stage, Commissioner Vanessa Washington watched her son with quiet pride. The past 3 months had been both challenging and transformative for the department under her leadership. The comprehensive investigation had revealed a network of misconduct far beyond Caldwell, resulting in 12 terminations, 23 suspensions, and 4 criminal indictments for civil rights violations. Sullivan had resigned rather than face investigation, along with several other high-ranking officers implicated in systematic cover-ups. While painful, the purge had created space for meaningful reform. Vanessa had implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation and bias recognition, revised use of force policies, and established a civilian oversight committee with actual disciplinary authority. Most significantly, she had restructured performance evaluations to prioritize community engagement over arrest statistics, fundamentally changing incentives throughout the force. The results were already evident in preliminary data. Civilian complaints had decreased 42% in targeted precincts. Arrest disparities between white and minority citizens had narrowed. Community satisfaction surveys showed modest but consistent improvement in trust metrics. These changes hadn't come without resistance. The police union initially fought every reform, filing lawsuits and organizing work slowdowns. Conservative media portrayed Vanessa as an anti-police radical, pushing a dangerous agenda. City council meetings became battlegrounds between reform advocates and those warning about rising crime rates, despite statistics showing no significant increases. Yet public opinion had gradually shifted as results accumulated. Business leaders, initially skeptical, became supporters when improved police-community relations led to better economic conditions in previously over-policed neighborhoods. Religious organizations across denominations embraced the reforms as moral imperatives. Even some retired officers began speaking out about the toxic culture they had witnessed but felt powerless to change during their careers. The most dramatic shift came 6 weeks after the hearing, when Caldwell's planned retaliation spectacularly backfired. His involvement with the extremists, guardians of justice, had escalated from angry rhetoric to concrete planning of intimidation tactics against Vanessa, Marcus, and their supporters. Unbeknownst to Caldwell, the group had been infiltrated by an undercover detective documenting their increasingly violent discussions. When Caldwell outlined a plan to vandalize the Washingtons' home and leave threatening messages, authorities moved swiftly. His arrest on conspiracy charges made national headlines, transforming him from martyred officer to cautionary tale. With their most vocal champion discredited, remaining resistance within the department rapidly diminished. For Marcus, the months following the hearing had been a journey of personal growth alongside community activism. After much reflection, he had decided to study constitutional law. His Harvard application now highlighting his first-hand experience with justice system failures and his commitment to systemic reform. More immediately, he had established Timepiece as a formal organization, securing nonprofit status and initial funding from community foundations. With dedicated office space in a church annex and 20 youth volunteers, Timepiece had already assisted dozens of profiling victims with documentation, counseling referrals, and legal resources. The organization's smartphone app, allowing users to record and report incidents while automatically notifying designated contacts, had been downloaded over 5,000 times. Marcus had emerged as an eloquent voice for his generation, balancing academic excellence with growing advocacy skills. Though still occasionally plagued by nightmares, he had channeled his trauma into purpose, transforming victimization into leadership with his therapist's continued support. As Marcus concluded his address to the cadets, he returned to the symbol that had catalyzed his journey. This watch represents different things to different people. To Officer Caldwell, it represented something I couldn't legitimately possess because of my race. To me, it represented my mother's pride in my achievements. Today, it represents something new. The time we all must dedicate to creating a justice system worthy of its name. Vanessa joined him at the podium for the ceremonial presentation of badges. A visual representation of the department's new direction, a black woman who had fought the system from within now leading it toward accountability. Alongside her son whose unjust treatment had exposed its deepest flaws. Following the ceremony, they visited Greenfield Mall together for the first time since the incident. The electronics store where everything began had been transformed into a community engagement center, where officers held regular, know your rights, workshops and built relationships with local youth. As they entered, a security guard approached a teenager examining expensive headphones, his manner raising alarm bells in Marcus's hyper-vigilant awareness. But instead of confrontation, the guard offered assistance, explaining features and demonstrating options. Watching the interaction, Marcus felt something tight within his chest begin to loosen. 1 month later, Vanessa received the call she had been working toward her entire career. An appointment to head the state's new police reform commission, overseeing standardized training, accountability measures, and community engagement programs for departments across the state. The position would allow her to implement on a broader scale the changes she had proven effective locally. While preparing for the transition, she found Marcus in his room, surrounded by timepiece materials and college brochures. "Are you ready for this next chapter?" she asked, sitting beside him on his bed. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think so. Everything's different now, the department, the community, us. But it's a good different. Change always comes with resistance," Vanessa noted. "We'll face new challenges at the state level. But we'll face them with more allies than before," Marcus pointed out. "That's what this whole experience taught me. Individual incidents can become movements when people connect their stories." A documentary team was following their journey, creating a film that would eventually be used in police academies nationwide as a case study in bias recognition and institutional change. Media interest had evolved from sensationalism to substantive coverage of reform efforts. Former victims of profiling were running for local office, determined to influence policy from within the system. The watch that had sparked everything remained on Marcus's wrist. No longer a target for suspicion but a conversation starter about presumption of innocence and equal protection under law. 3 weeks before Vanessa's state appointment began, Marcus helped another teenager who had been wrongfully accused of shoplifting at the same mall. Using Timepiece's protocols, he documented the incident, connected the young man with legal counsel, and accompanied him to file a formal complaint under the new streamlined system. The officer involved was quickly identified as having similar incidents in his record and placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The contrast with Marcus's own experience couldn't have been more stark. What had taken months of public pressure and exceptional circumstances now followed established procedures designed to protect civil rights routinely rather than exceptionally. This, Marcus realized, was the true measure of change, not headlines or policy documents, but the systematic protection of dignity for those who would otherwise be overlooked. As Vanessa prepared for her final press conference as commissioner, Marcus adjusted her collar, a role reversal that made them both smile. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when you gave me this watch, you said it represented excellence and achievement. Now it represents something even better." "What's that?" Vanessa asked. "The possibility of justice," Marcus replied. "Not just for those with connections or cameras recording, but for everyone." Outside the conference room, reporters waited to hear about the department's transformation statistics, the new accountability measures, the statewide implementation plans. But the real story couldn't be captured in press releases or policy papers. It lived in the changed interactions between officers and citizens, in the restored trust slowly building in previously alienated communities, in the courage of those who had spoken truth to power and been heard. And it lived in Marcus Washington, who entered a mall as an ordinary teenager and emerged as a reluctant symbol of both injustice and hope, his personal humiliation transformed into a catalyst for changes that would benefit thousands. Or would never know his name. What's your experience with police interactions in your community? Has it changed over time? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can continue building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve. If Marcus's story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to see more stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. And remember to share with someone who needs to understand that one person's stand against injustice can transform an entire system. Thank you for listening to Marcus's journey from victim to advocate, from trauma to purpose, from injustice to transformation. This powerful story illustrates how systemic racism operates through everyday assumptions about who belongs with luxury items or in certain spaces. Marcus's experience shows that racial profiling affects people regardless of their social status or connections. The only difference was his mother's position allowed for accountability where most victims receive none. The incident reveals how bias becomes institutionalized when good officers remain silent and supervisors bury complaints. True transformation requires both individual courage and systemic overhaul. We see that meaningful change comes not just through removing bad apples, but by reimagining policing fundamentals. Shifting from arrest metrics to community engagement, implementing civilian oversight with actual power, and creating transparent complaint processes. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus teaches us that trauma can be transformed into purpose when victims connect their individual stories to larger patterns of injustice and channel their pain into advocacy for others. Justice isn't achieved through single victories but through persistent reform efforts that change both policies and hearts. Have you or someone you know ever been judged unfairly based on appearance rather than actions? Share your experience in the comments below. If Marcus's journey from victim to advocate inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing up against discrimination and creating positive change. How do you think we should address racial profiling in your community? Let us know your thoughts. And if you believe others need to hear this message about transformation and justice, please share this video with friends and family. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of injustice, accountability, and healing. Remember, real change begins when we refuse to accept discrimination as normal and work together toward a more just society.